Do you think Silent Hill was just a video game? A fictional nightmare conjured from the imagination of Japanese developers looking to compete with Resident Evil? What if I told you that the fog, the ash, the abandoned buildings, the sense of a town that exists between worlds, all of it was based on something real? Something that's still happening right now as you listen to this in a town that the United States government has tried to erase from existence? The story begins not in Japan, but in the mountains of eastern Pennsylvania, in a place called Centralia. And what happened there, what's still happening there, suggests that Silent Hill wasn't a game at all. It was a warning. In 1962, in the small mining town of Centralia, Pennsylvania, local firefighters were burning trash in an abandoned strip mine pit. It was Memorial Day weekend. The fire was routine. What happened next was not. The flames found a vein of anthracite coal that ran beneath the town, a vein that connected to an underground labyrinth of mines spanning hundreds of miles. Within days, the fire had spread beyond any hope of containment. By the time anyone understood what was happening, the ground beneath Centralia was burning. That fire is still burning today, 63 years later, and the official story, the one you'll find in textbooks and tourism websites, tells you that Centralia is simply an environmental disaster, an unfortunate accident, a ghost town that makes for interesting photographs. But the official story doesn't explain the documents. It doesn't explain the disappearances, and it doesn't explain why, in 1999, a Japanese video game company created an almost perfect replica of Centralia and called it Silent Hill, years before most Americans had ever heard of the burning town. To understand what really happened, we need to go back further, not to 1962, but to 1943. During World War II, the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania was considered vital to the war effort. The mines produced the fuel that powered American industry, but the mines also produced something else. In the summer of 1943, a team of Army Corps engineers conducting a routine geological survey in the tunnels beneath what would later become Centralia reported something unusual. Their compasses stopped working, their equipment malfunctioned. 3 members of the survey team reported severe disorientation, headaches, and what one described in his field report as a sense of profound wrongness. The survey was classified. The team was reassigned. The report was filed with the Office of Strategic Services and forgotten, until it was partially declassified in 2003 as part of a routine document release. By then, of course, no one was looking. What the 1943 survey had discovered was a geological anomaly. The coal beneath Centralia wasn't ordinary anthracite. Chemical analysis conducted decades later would reveal trace elements that don't appear in any other coal deposit on Earth. Elements that, when burned, produce not just carbon monoxide, but a complex mixture of gases that affect human neurology in ways that remain poorly understood. The fire of 1962 wasn't an accident. It was an experiment. In the late 1950s, a research program was established under the joint oversight of the Department of Energy and the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. The program was designated Project Infernus, and its purpose was to study the potential military applications of underground coal fires. The Soviet Union had similar programs. The idea was simple. If you could ignite coal deposits beneath enemy cities, you could render them uninhabitable without dropping a single bomb. No radiation, no obvious cause, just a slow, invisible poisoning of the ground itself. Centralia was chosen as the test site for several reasons. It was isolated, its population was small and economically dependent on the coal industry, people who would be easy to relocate if necessary, and most importantly, it sat above that anomalous coal deposit, the deposit that the 1943 survey had flagged, the deposit that produced gases with unknown neurological effects. The trash fire story was a cover, a convenient explanation for what was actually a controlled ignition conducted by a team of specialists who arrived in Centralia 3 days before Memorial Day 1962 and left the morning after the fire began. Local records show that several EPA inspectors were present in town that week, unusual given that the EPA wouldn't exist for another 8 years. Within months of the ignition, reports began to emerge. Not publicly. These were internal documents shared between agencies, classified at various levels. Reports of Centralia residents experiencing vivid hallucinations. Reports of temporal disorientation. People losing hours, sometimes days, with no memory of what had happened. Reports of shared nightmares. Identical dreams reported by people who had never met, featuring the same locations, the same figures, the same overwhelming sense of dread. The most disturbing reports involved the children. Teachers at the local elementary school documented a pattern of behavior that began approximately 6 weeks after the fire started. Children would stop mid-activity, stare at nothing, and speak in low voices about the other town. When questioned, they described a place that looked like Centralia, but wasn't. A place where the buildings were wrong, where the sky was always the color of rust, where something was waiting. These reports were collected, analyzed, and filed. The children were monitored. Some were relocated to foster care in other states. Their parents were told different stories: behavioral problems, educational opportunities, family reunification program. The paper trail is fragmentary, but it exists, and it suggests that by 1965, the researchers running Project Inferno had discovered something they hadn't anticipated. The gases weren't just affecting human neurology, they were affecting reality itself. I know how that sounds, but consider the evidence. In 1967, a team of geologists from Penn State was permitted to conduct a limited study of the Centralia fire's progression. Their report, published in an obscure academic journal and later quietly withdrawn, included an anomaly that has never been explained. The team's surveying equipment showed the fire burning in locations that were geographically impossible, outside the boundaries of the coal deposit, in areas where there was no fuel to burn. One reading suggested active combustion nearly 2 miles from the nearest mine shaft of solid granite. The team leader, a professor named Arthur Hensley, requested funding for a follow-up study. His request was denied. 3 months later, he resigned from Penn State and moved to Arizona. He never published again. When a journalist tried to contact him in 1981 for a feature on Centralia, he was told that Hensley had died in 1978. Cause of death listed as heart failure. He was 42 years old. Throughout the 1970s, the situation in Centralia deteriorated. The fire spread. The ground cracked open, releasing plumes of toxic gas. Sinkholes appeared without warning. In 1979, the owner of a local gas station nearly died when a sinkhole opened beneath him, releasing superheated steam and carbon monoxide. That incident made national news and triggered the evacuation efforts that would eventually empty the town. But the evacuation wasn't just about safety. Internal memos from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Resources, obtained through a Freedom of Information request in 2011, revealed that the state was receiving pressure from federal agencies to relocate the population as quickly as possible. The concern wasn't just the fire, it was what the residents were reporting. By 1980, the shared hallucination phenomenon had reached a critical point. Multiple residents, interviewed separately, described seeing the same things. A figure standing in the fog, tall with a head that seemed wrong, angular, covered in something that might have been metal or might have been skin. Sounds that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The sensation of being watched by something that wasn't human. And then there were the disappearances. Between 1975 and 1984, 11 people vanished from Centralia and its immediate vicinity. Not died, vanished. No bodies were ever recovered. The official explanation varied. Some were classified as runaways, others as probable suicides in the mine shafts. One, a 17-year-old girl named only as MC in the police reports, was last seen walking into a fog bank near the old mining pit. Her footprints ended in the middle of an empty field. Search dogs refused to approach the area. The MC case was investigated by a state trooper named David Kearns. His case notes, recovered from his estate after his death in 2003, paint a disturbing picture. Kearns believed that the disappearances were connected. He documented the geological anomalies, the witness reports, the pattern of shared hallucinations. He also documented something else, his own experiences. In the final months of his investigation, Kearns reported difficulty distinguishing between waking and sleeping. He described dreams of Centralia that felt more real than his daily life, dreams where the town was different, darker, older, populated by things that wore human shapes but weren't human. His last case note, dated November 1984, consists of a single line. "It's not a fire, it's a door." Kearns was found dead in his home 3 days later. The official cause was carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heater. His family disputed this. The heater had been inspected 2 weeks earlier and found to be in perfect working condition. His case files disappeared from the state police archives. The copies recovered from his estate were incomplete. By 1985, the evacuation of Centralia was nearly complete. The federal government had offered buyouts to every remaining resident. Those who refused, and there were a few, stubborn holdouts who insisted on staying in their homes, were subject to eminent domain proceedings. The town's zip code, 17927, was revoked. Streets were removed from maps. The state began demolishing buildings, but they didn't demolish everything. If you visit Centralia today, and you can, though I wouldn't recommend it, you'll find that the town isn't entirely empty. A few buildings remain standing. Roads still wind through the hillside, though many are cracked and buckled from the heat below. Steam still rises from fissures in the ground, especially in winter, and at the top of the hill overlooking what was once the center of town, there's a small white church. The church was supposed to be demolished in 1991. The order was signed. The demolition crew was scheduled. The morning of the demolition, the crew refused to proceed. The foreman, interviewed years later, would only say that when they approached the church, something happened. He wouldn't specify what. He said he'd promised not to talk about it. Promised who? He wouldn't say. The church still stands. If you look at photographs of it, and there are many, Centralia has become a destination for urban explorers and photographers, you'll notice something peculiar. The church is always shown from the same angles, always from a distance. Despite hundreds of visitors documenting the site over the decades, there are almost no interior photographs of the Centralia church, and the few that exist show discrepancies, structural features that don't match, shadows that fall in the wrong directions. In one photograph, taken in 2014 and posted to a now deleted urban exploration forum, there appears to be a figure standing behind the altar. The photographer claimed he was alone when he took the picture. This brings us to Silent Hill. In 1996, a small team at Konami Computer Entertainment Tokyo began development on a horror game. The project lead, Keiichiro Toyama, has given many interviews about the game's creation over the years. He's spoken about his influences, the films of David Lynch, the works of Stephen King, the psychological horror of authors like Thomas Harris. What he has rarely spoken about, and what has never been adequately explained, is how the team came to base their fictional town so precisely on Centralia, Pennsylvania. The parallels are beyond coincidence. The fog that blankets Silent Hill, obscuring everything beyond a few feet. Centralia is frequently shrouded in smoke and steam from the underground fire. The ash that falls like snow in the game, particulate matter from the burning coal, creates exactly this effect in winter months. The town's history of mining, religious extremism, and dark secrets. Centralia was a mining town with a history of labor violence and religious tension between its Ukrainian and Irish Catholic communities. The sense of a town existing between two worlds, one ordinary and one nightmarish. This matches exactly the reports from Centralia residents in the 1970s and 1980s. And then there's the geography. When researchers have overlaid maps of Silent Hill onto maps of Centralia, the correspondence is striking. The positions of key buildings, the layout of streets, even the location of the church on the hill, it all matches, not approximately, precisely. The official explanation is that the development team was inspired by the 1990 film Jacob's Ladder and the general concept of American ghost towns. But development documents leaked from Konami in 2007 tell a different story. These documents, which appeared briefly on a Japanese file-sharing site before being removed, included concept art dated months before official development began, art depicting locations that would appear in the game, art that included photographs, not sketches, photographs of buildings that existed only in Centralia. One document, partially translated before the leak was scrubbed, referenced a source package provided by an American consultant. The consultant's name was redacted. The document described the package as containing geographic data, atmospheric samples, and documentation of localized phenomena. Atmospheric samples from Centralia, the town where the burning coal produces gases with unknown neurological effects. What was Konami doing with atmospheric samples from Centralia? The most disturbing document in the leak was a translation memo. It appeared to be notes from a meeting between the development team and someone identified only as the American contact. The notes were fragmentary, but they included phrases like perceptual threshold, shared consciousness field, and controlled exposure methodology. The memo concluded with a question: is it ethical to create this experience for players without informed consent? We don't know how that question was answered. What we do know is that Silent Hill was released in 1999 and became one of the most psychologically affecting games ever created. Players reported experiences that went beyond normal gaming, nightmares that persisted for weeks, a sense of unease that didn't fade when the console was turned off. In online forums from the early 2000s, many now archived only on the Wayback Machine, you can find hundreds of testimonials from players who described feeling that the game had changed something in them, that it had opened something they couldn't close. The sequel, Silent Hill 2, released in 2001, intensified these effects. The game's psychological complexity, its exploration of guilt, grief, and self-punishment, resonated with players on a level that felt almost invasive. Multiple players reported that the game seemed to know things about them, that its symbolism aligned too precisely with their own traumas, that it felt less like playing a game and more like being analyzed. This might sound like coincidence, confirmation bias, the natural tendency to find patterns where none exist. But consider this. In 2006, a research paper was published in an obscure journal of perceptual psychology. The paper, authored by a team at a university in Germany, documented a study of video game players' psychological responses. The game studied included several popular horror titles. The results for Silent Hill players were anomalous. They showed measurable changes in brain activity patterns that persisted for weeks after exposure, changes that matched, according to the paper's authors, patterns seen in subjects exposed to consciousness-altering environmental stimuli. The paper was retracted 6 months after publication. The lead author left academia. The university's statement cited methodological concerns, but provided no specifics. What was the game doing to people's brains? This question becomes more disturbing when you consider the timeline. In 2004, 3 years after Silent Hill 2's release, there was a documented cluster of unusual psychological events among them. The evidence is scattered. Forum posts, news articles about individual cases, a single academic paper that mentioned the phenomenon before being quietly revised. But the pattern is consistent. Players who had spent significant time with the Silent Hill games began reporting experiences similar to those documented in Centralia resident 1970. Shared dream, temporal disorientation, the sensation of being watched by something that wasn't visible, the sense that their environment was somehow wrong, reality had a seam they could almost perceive. In at least 4 documented cases, these experiences escalated to the point of hospitalization. One player, a 23-year-old in California, was found by his roommate, standing motionless in front of a wall, staring at a point approximately 6 inches from the surface. He had been standing there for 11 hours. He later described the experience as looking through. Through what? He couldn't explain. The game's creator, Keiichiro Toyama, left Konami in 1999 immediately after the first Silent Hill's release. His subsequent projects have been darker, stranger, more overtly surreal. In interviews, he has occasionally hinted that his time working on Silent Hill affected him in ways he struggles to articulate. In 2014, he made a cryptic comment into a Japanese gaming magazine that was translated as, "I think we found something we weren't supposed to find, or it found us. I'm still not sure which." Meanwhile, back in Pennsylvania, the fire beneath Centralia continued to burn and the phenomena continued. In 2007, a group of urban explorers, 5 people from Philadelphia, traveled to Centralia to photograph the site. They documented their trip extensively in a blog that was later archived. Their initial posts were enthusiastic, excited about exploring the famous ghost town. Their final post, written the day after their return, was markedly different in tone. The group reported that while walking through the town at dusk, they had become separated. The fog that rolled in from the vents had grown thick enough that they couldn't see each other, even from a few feet away. When they reconvened at their vehicle, each member described a different experience. One claimed to have seen buildings that shouldn't have existed, structures that appeared intact, occupied, with lights in the windows. Another reported hearing a siren in the distance, followed by what sounded like industrial machinery. A third said she had encountered another person on the road, a woman in clothing from another era who had asked her, "Are you real, or are you from the other side?" The group compared notes and discovered something that disturbed them deeply. They had each experienced a different duration of separation. One thought he had been walking for 10 minutes. Another insisted it had been nearly 2 hours. Their phones' timestamps showed a period of approximately 45 minutes, during which no photographs were taken by any of them, a gap that none could account for. The blog's final entry concluded with a warning: "Don't go there. We can't explain what happened, and we don't want to try. Just don't go." Similar accounts have accumulated over the years. Centralia has developed a reputation in urban exploration communities as a place that affects people in unusual ways. Compasses spin, electronics malfunction, time becomes unreliable, and in the fog, in the steam rising from the burning ground, people see things that shouldn't be there. In 2012, a documentary crew attempted to film a feature on Centralia. The project was never completed. The footage that exists, portions of which appeared briefly on YouTube before being removed, shows the crew experiencing increasingly strange events over their 3-day shoot. Equipment failed repeatedly. Audio recordings captured sounds that weren't audible during filming. And in one sequence, shot at night near the church, the director can be heard saying, "There's someone in there. There's definitely someone in there." The church had been locked and sealed. No one should have been inside. The director, whose name I won't include at their request, later described the experience as the worst decision of my career. They said they still have dreams about the church, about what they saw through the windows, about the figure that seemed to be looking back at them. This brings us to the present. The fire beneath Centralia is still burning. Experts estimate it could continue for another 250 years or longer. The coal deposit is vast, and once such a fire starts, there's no known way to extinguish it. The town remains officially abandoned, though a handful of residents still live there, refusing to leave despite repeated government attempts to relocate them. These holdouts are an unusual group. They've been interviewed occasionally by journalists seeking stories about stubborn individualism or government overreach. But read those interviews carefully, and you'll notice something. The longtime residents don't talk about the fire the way you'd expect. They don't complain about the smoke, the sinkholes, the constant danger. Instead, they speak almost protectively about Centralia, as if they're guarding something, as if leaving would be abandoning a duty they can't explain. One resident interviewed in 2018 was asked why she stayed. Her answer was strange. Because someone has to watch the door. Someone has to make sure it stays closed. When the journalist asked what door she meant, she ended the interview. The video game connection continues. In 2014, Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro announced they were working on a new Silent Hill project. which they revealed through one of the most unsettling teaser experiences in gaming history. The teaser, called PT, depicted a looping hallway in an abandoned house, a space that felt wrong in ways that were difficult to articulate. Players who experienced PT reported psychological effects similar to those documented in earlier Silent Hill players. The sense of being watched, dreams that echoed the game's imagery, a persistent unease that lasted for weeks. The project was canceled in 2015 under circumstances that have never been adequately explained. Official statements cited creative differences between Konami and the creative team, but internal sources suggested something else. That during development, events had occurred that made continuation impossible. That team members had experienced things they refused to discuss. That someone or something had made it clear that the project should not proceed. Kojima has never spoken publicly about what happened, but in 2016, at a gaming convention, he was asked about Silent Hill. His response, translated from Japanese, was, "There are some doors that should stay closed. I learned that lesson. I hope I never forget it." In 2020, during the global pandemic, reports from Centralia increased. With fewer people traveling, the holdout residents found themselves more isolated than ever. And in that isolation, they began documenting what they saw. Posts appeared on obscure forums, on social media accounts with few followers, on Reddit communities dedicated to paranormal phenomena. The posts described escalating activity, sounds from underground, not just the expected rumbling of the fire, but something rhythmic, almost mechanical, shadows that moved against the fog, and in several reports, a siren that came from everywhere and nowhere, that lasted for exactly 3 minutes, and that was followed by a period where the town seemed to shift. One poster, who claimed to have visited Centralia in October 2020, wrote, "When the siren stopped, I swear the church was in a different place, just slightly, like someone had moved it 20 feet to the left, and there were fresh footprints in the ash around it, footprints that weren't human, too long, too narrow, like someone had been walking on stilts made of bone." This account was dismissed by most readers as creative writing, but 3 other visitors to Centralia that month reported the same thing: the siren, the shift, the footprints. One of them provided photographs. The photograph showed a set of tracks in the gray ash, leading from the church toward the edge of town. The tracks ended at the old mine entrance, the entrance that had been sealed with concrete in 1969, the entrance that in the photographs appeared to be open. The photographer who took those images deleted their account 2 days after posting. Attempts to contact them have been unsuccessful, and now as I record this, the fire continues to burn, the fog continues to rise, the church continues to stand on the hill, watching over a town that exists on maps that shouldn't include it anymore, in a space that seems to operate by rules that aren't quite the rules of the world we know. I've spent months researching this. I've read the documents. I've spoken to people who've been to Centralia, people who worked on the games, people who study perceptual phenomena, and I've come to a conclusion I'm not sure I should share. Silent Hill wasn't fiction inspired by a real place. It was documentation, a careful coded description of something that's been happening in Pennsylvania since 1962, something that may have been happening for far longer. The developers of Konami didn't invent the Otherworld, that nightmare realm that exists alongside Silent Hill's mundane surface. They mapped it, using data, samples, and testimony from the people who had been exposed to whatever is really beneath Centralia. The games weren't entertainment, they were transmission. They were a way of preparing people for something, of testing whether exposure to the phenomenon, even simulated exposure through images and sound, could produce effects similar to direct contact with the site. And based on the reports, based on the research, based on what I've found, it worked. If you've played Silent Hill, any of the original games, you may have been affected. You may have noticed changes in your perception that you attributed to other causes, dreams you couldn't explain, moments of déjà vu that felt deeper than ordinary déjà vu, the sense sometimes that the world around you isn't quite solid, that there's something else underneath, something watching. That's not your imagination. That's not anxiety or stress or too much time looking at screens. That's the door. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. I don't know what's really beneath Centralia. I don't know if it's a natural phenomenon, some combination of gases and geology that affects human consciousness in ways we don't understand, or if it's something else, something that was there before the town, something that the fire didn't create, but awakened. What I do know is that the phenomena are real. The documents exist. The disappearances happen. The psychological effects on residents and visitors have measured, and the fire is still burning. There's something I should tell you before I finish. As I was researching this, I started to experience some of the things I've described. Nothing dramatic, just small things. Moments where I'd look up from my work and the room would seem different. The angle slightly off, the light coming from direction. Dreams where I was walking through fog, following footprints that led to a door I knew I shouldn't open. And 3 days ago, I received an email. No sender address. It's just a blank field where the name should be. The email contained a single image, a photograph of a white church on a hill, shrouded in fog. The church at Centralia. But in this photograph, the door was open, and standing in the doorway, barely visible in the haze, was a shape. I deleted the email, but that night I dreamed of the church. I dreamed I was walking up the hill toward it. I dreamed the door was open and something was waiting inside. And in the dream, I heard a siren. When I woke up, my phone's clock was wrong. It showed that 3 hours had passed, but my computer said it had only been 45 minutes. And on my desk, on the notes I'd been compiling about Centralia, there was ash, a light dusting of gray ash, as if something had been burned nearby. I've said too much. I've researched too deeply. I've looked at something that looks back. If you're still listening to this, I need you to understand something. This isn't the part where I ask you to like and subscribe. This isn't the part where I tell you to share this video with everyone you know. This is the part where I tell you the opposite. Don't share this. Don't talk about it. Don't search for more information about Centralia or Project Infernus or the connection to Silent Hill. Every person who digs into this, every researcher, every journalist, every curious visitor, something happens to them. They disappear. They die in unlikely accidents. Or they change. They become quiet. They stop returning calls. They move away without telling anyone where they're going. If you've watched this far, you've already been exposed to something. The images, the descriptions, the patterns. There's nothing you can do about that now. But you can limit your exposure. You can refuse to go deeper. If you agree with what I'm saying, if you understand why I'm telling you this, don't comment, don't react. If you must acknowledge that you've seen this, use only these words. The fog is normal. That way, I'll know you understand. That way, we'll know each other. I'm gonna stop recording now. I've already decided to relocate. I won't say where. I've taken precautions that I hope will be enough, but I'm not certain they will be. There's one last thing I need you to know. The next time you're in a familiar place, your home, your workplace, somewhere you've been 1,000 times, and something seems different, not wrong exactly, just off. The angle's not quite right. The light coming from a direction that doesn't make sense. A sound in the distance that might be a siren. When that happens, don't investigate. Don't look for the source. Just leave. Go somewhere public. Somewhere with other people. Because that feeling, that sense of wrongness, that's the door opening. And whatever's on the other side, it's been waiting for a very long time. The fire is still burning.